had the last bit.
Can I get you to sit over?
Coming up next, Webster.
Good morning. Two information topics this morning. I will not be ranting, I will not be raving as of this present moment.
Mike.
What? Mike. This is a wonderful way to start the morning. I now put on my microphone. It's my fault. And I'll start all over again. Good morning. Two information topics this morning. One is on the fishing industry and one is on the legal profession. And you're bound in the course of your lifetime to get involved in each of these industries. Buy the horribly expensive fish or buy sometimes horribly expensive lawyers. Now, the fishing story this morning is on that bedeviled Pierce report by Peter Pierce, the academician, who has produced a report, and I find this morning that the fishing industry, and especially the union, are totally against Pierce and his report. They say it's unworkable, unfair, and everything else. And to speak for the union this morning is Bruce Logan, who is chairman of the Fight Back Committee on the Pierce Report, and for colour, nostalgia, and outspoken words, the indomitable Homer Stevens, now not a union bureaucrat, but an honest-to-God fisherman. With them are two others, Grant Snell and Dave McIntosh, who are active, honest-to-God fishermen. Later in the program, we're going to take another look, or the first look I've taken, at a $700,000 report in both languages, keyed to an experimental public defender project in Burnaby, British Columbia. Legal aid is like Topsy. It grows and grows and grows and grows and may take over the world. And I am told in this report, one of whose authors is here this morning, Miss Brantig, oh, if I get her name wrong, she'll kill me. Miss Brantingham, an associate professor of criminology at the University of British Columbia, and with her, Simon Fraser. This is not my morning. And with her is my old friend Brian Rolfe, executive director of the Legal Services Society in British Columbia. And they might tell us that the public defender system, instead of the present system of legal aid, could save many millions of dollars in British Columbia. First for the fishermen, after the break. There is endless conflict in Canada, and especially on the West Coast, of how to handle, conserve our fishing industry. We went through the Davis buyback program not so many years ago, and it seemed to finish up as a bit of a disaster. And now Peter Pierce has produced his report on a new fishing policy for Canada. And the Pierce recommendations are, in many ways, revolutionary. He wants to levy royalties on the landings of some of our major species. And he wants to see the fishing fleet cut in half. He wants to abolish the system of licensing a vessel. And he wants, believe it or not, another buyback program financed with $50 million federal grants, plus a corporation which would raise money from royalties to buy back more boats. But the response from the industry, union and non-union, I think it's fair to say, has been totally against it. Now, with me is Bruce Logan, who is chairman of the Fishermen's Union Fight Pierce Committee, and Homer Stevens, vast experience in negotiation and back again fishing. Put it in one word. What about the Pierce report?
In one word, it's anti-fisherman. You mentioned introducing it that you feel that the report is new and revolutionary. Well, the point we want to make there is that this report is not new. We've heard it all before.
Not revolutionary.
It's not new. It's basically an extension of Jack Davis's plan that brought us to the situation we're in today.
But isn't
total chaos.
Pierce, with the best will in the world towards him, if you can express it, at least trying to do something in the way of cutting down the admittedly excess number of ships in the fleet?
Well, that's what Jack Davis started out to do as well. He said that he was going to make millionaires out of the fishermen by reducing the size of the fleet and the amount of capital. Instead of $2 worth of equipment chasing $1 worth of fish, he was going to reverse that procedure. It went exactly the opposite way. And Peter Pierce was called in what Davis called his Phase 4 study and made precisely the same recommendation he makes now, and that is that the fishermen buy themselves out by their own bootstraps. Buy out those that possibly are going broke because of the excessive capitalization, and then be taxed heavier in case they do make any money.
But you people have got to accept some responsibility for the present state of the industry, correct?
We'd love to accept some responsibility.
Some of the blame, I mean.
Some of the blame?
No, I would say absolutely not, Jack. How could we take blame for the fact that Dr. Jack Davis, followed by Dr. Pierce and now Dr. Pepper, and all these doctors have been doctoring it up in such a way that we have a hell of a time to just make a living out of it, and then say, well, we're at fault. We told them before Davis came into the picture that it had to be this way, that if they put the license on the thing, it was going to be something like the taxi operations, except that nobody could tell how many people were walking down the street.
I just want to make one observation, and you tell me about this. I'm not a fisherman, but every year we see great television coverage of hundreds of thousands of salmon or herring being pulled on board boats. We hear about the prices, and the fishermen are always boasting how much money they made on this year's catch and how they've gone out and bought new $1 million boats. Now, somebody's making money out of the fishing industry, right?
Somebody's making money. The question is who? I've been fishing in this industry now 7 years. I've seen my income plummet. I'll tell you who's making money. It's the companies. The price of the product is skyrocketing to the point now where Canadians that own the resource feel they can't even buy it. It's a bloody luxury item these days. Our incomes, on the other hand, have just gone right down. So
some incomes. Many fishermen
most incomes.
What about all these big new
The problem,
boats?
Jack, is that the media plays up every time there's a big catch, if somebody makes a big catch. But how often do they go out there when fishermen are tied to the dock 4 and 5 days out of every week, or 6 days out of a week? How often do they publicize the small catches? How often do they publicize the actual earnings of the fishermen, the average earnings?
Well, it seems that there are bigger boats every year, and then guys come along and say we've got to have more subsidies because of the money we owe on the boats.
Oh, well, that's exactly what we said was wrong with the Davis plan. Once they put the license on the boat and made the boat a valuable commodity, plus the fact that a state-created privilege was attached to it, which could go up and down with markets and with the size of runs and so on, it reached a point where every fisherman that had any money that he might make in the case of a boat owner was trying to reinvest in a bigger boat in that same rat race to keep afloat. And the result was just a worsening of a bad scene rather than improving.
But by itself, the fishing fleet does not get any smaller, does it?
The fishing fleet itself, no, it does not get any smaller. The capacity of the fishing fleet has increased. If you go back to the root of the problem that we feel we're in now, which is the Davis Plan, the introduction of the Davis Plan. Now that was supposedly a limited entry scheme. It was designed to curtail the size of the fleet and increase the earnings of fishermen. Now you have to question the validity of any scheme that poses as a limited entry scheme and starts the whole ball rolling by introducing 571 new boats into the fleet. Or rather, 571 boats were taken out of the fleet, but the fishing capacity and capitalization increased to the point where in less than a year you had $8 million in fishing
Give me
capital.
some of his reasoning, which you don't like. He's proposing, as I understand it, a royalty, a specific landing levy on certain types of fish, correct? Which fish?
It's been proposed for the salmon, I believe, for the halibut, and possibly the roe herring.
Roe herring. Now, who will pay that royalty?
Well, the public might think that, and Pierce has mentioned that the fish buyers will be the collectors of the royalty, the so-called royalty, but of course they'll be collecting it from us. It's the fisherman that's going to pay that royalty. And by the way, we don't look at it as a royalty, because a royalty, you might say, would be paid by people that are able to capture a certain what they call a resource rent from the industry. Fishermen barely make a living. We don't view that as a royalty at all. It's a tax. And we feel we're taxed to the limit right now. We can't afford to pay.
Are these taxes going to be put into a subsidy bank to buy back boats?
Well, that's precisely what Pierce is proposing.
Plus, plus a lot of public money too. Some seed money of $50 million.
If you read his report carefully, he's proposing that $50 million seed money, plus the money that is borrowed back with interest, there's $100 million to be borrowed, that all of that eventually be paid by the fishermen who are able to remain in the industry.
Is he trying to squeeze out fishermen?
Oh, I think most certainly he's trying to squeeze out the small fishermen and put the power squarely in the hands of the big companies.
Salmon vessels, we've presently got 5,000, herring 2,000 vessels, and halibut 425. Is it reasonable that that fleet should be cut in size?
Well, we think so, Jack, but we believe it should be done on a more rational basis.
How?
One of our concepts of it is that if the license were placed on the person, and when that person either retires or dies or attrition takes place in one way or another, that license goes. That operation is ended. And that it should be done in such a way that we look at that section of the fleet that is causing the greatest problem, for example, in salmon, and that the cutback should be done in one sector to begin with and then eventually spread to the others. Because as it happened in the Davis plan, the biggest fleet that got built up was the seine fleet, much more so than the small boat fleet, by pyramiding, as Pierce has pointed out. Now he wants to stop pyramiding, but he has nothing in his report to say what the industry should look like 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road.
Just let me get one thing clear, Homer. The present Pierce recommendations on licensing are for individuals or companies that own a boat. Is that right?
Yes, any person. In other words, a company can be a person.
All right.
And you could own a boat. Anybody could own it.
Under the Pierce support,
Or the license.
can I sell that license?
Yes.
That's
What we
the key.
consider the Achilles heel of the Pierce report, of Davis's plan. Our proposal is that the license be non-transferable in the sense that it can be sold from one to the other.
Is it your position that if the licensees died with the operation, the natural attrition would reduce the number of boats and fishermen in the fleet?
What we believe is that, yeah, we believe that to a certain extent. What we propose is rather than have a system that would break the backs of the small fishermen, we want to set up a system that would allow the fishermen that has, say, the pre-Davis guys that have a vessel and never put much money into a license, they would be able to get out with some amount of equity. The guys that bought their licenses at incredibly inflated prices, post-Davis plan, would be able to sell their licenses, but never be able to sell them for more money than what they paid for them originally.
Good.
That's the whole key to it. The license should not be an object of speculation.
Did you have a good season last season, Homer?
Well, I didn't have a big season, Jack, but I had certainly a better season than the year before. I had 2 or 3 real bad ones.
Thanks for coming along this morning. I'm going to bring in a couple of young fishermen with you, Bruce, and we're going to take calls, and you'll explain your fight against the possibility of the implementation of the Pierce report after the break. I wanted 3 fishermen to take the phone calls this morning. No slur on union executives or anything, but sometimes you get a more personal approach. Bruce Logan, what do you actually do? You're not a union official.
I'm not a union official, Jack. I'm a rank and file fisherman in the union. I'm a deckhand. on a seine boat.
Is that a company-owned seine or a privately owned
It's a
seine?
privately owned seine boat. We have fished for some of the major companies. The boat itself is owned by 3 partners.
Do you fish for shares?
I fish for a share of the catch, yeah. The vessel I work on, by the way, is like one of these Davis Plan vessels. The thing is worth about $1.5 million. Last year, I worked all season. I ended up with a take-home pay of about $9,000. I'm working on $1 million vessel. I can barely afford to pay my rent these days. That's the reality.
$9,000 take-home?
$9,000 take-home, and Pierce would have me give another $2,000, probably minimum $2,000 out of my pocket this year.
On the royalties taken from the
On the
boat?
royalties. That's the intent of the whole plan, we believe, is to take the, take the money right out of the hands of the
Dave McIntosh, you're an active fisherman.
Yes, I am.
What kind of fishing do you do?
Salmon fishing, herring fishing, and over the years I've done all sorts of fishing. I've been a fisherman all of my life.
Do you own your own boat?
Yes, I do.
Now, what kind of license have you got on it?
Well, I have an A license on my boat.
Can I ask you how much your boat is worth?
I have no idea, Jack, what the boat is worth. I do know, though, that the value of the boat is going down because there's so many fishermen that just really can't make a go of it, that no one really wants to get into the fishing
All
industry.
right. Yeah, dare I ask you, well, you tell me what the Pierce Report recommendations, if implemented, and you fish halibut, salmon, and herring.
Yes.
What would it do to you?
Well, number one, he's talking about doing away with the combination boats and making boats, as he calls it, single purpose. And I think he's trying to break the back of the small boat, and that would rationalize his effort at a buyback.
In other words,
Because
you wouldn't be allowed to go for halibut, salmon, and roe in order like that.
Well, I would be able to go after salmon and then the herring, but I'm in one of the 1,500 or 1,000 to 1,500 vessels that's classified as a combination troller gill netter. Now, not at the same time, but during different times of the season, we can do both. We can troll or we can gill net.
How many crew do you have in your boat?
I have 2.
What would they make last year?
Well, we had a young fella who likes to come out in the summer there for a couple of months. He made probably a couple of $1,000 or so, and then I have my deckhand, who is my wife, and she stays with me all of the time, and she makes 20% of the gross.
20% of the gross. I'm not going to push you in that, but you had a good year last year.
Last year, no, I didn't have a good year, not at all.
How much do you owe on your boat?
How much do I owe on my boat? Approximately $35,000.
That's
And I've owned it
18%.
And I've owned it, well, it's higher than that, Jack, and I've owned it for 10 years.
So you think the Pierce Report would cut your throat?
Well, that's, no sooner had the Pierce Report came out than the Department of Fisheries was talking about buying up 1,000 to 1,500 boats, mostly small boats.
But couldn't he sell out and make a bundle on his boat from the buyback program?
question is, does he want to sell? Are you going to implement a plan that's going to force this man to sell his boat? This is a bona fide fisherman. He's been in the industry all his life.
But at least
Perhaps
the Pierce Report says he can sell that for capital gain, doesn't it?
Well, the
Recommendation.
The income tax and all these sorts of things come into it, but the fact of the matter is I'm not interested in the capital gain. I'm a fisherman. I've owned my own boat since 1972. I've been fishing since 1964, and I don't care what the value of my boat it is. It's only my toolkit. It provides me with the opportunity to fish.
Grant Snell, tell me about yourself. You put it in these personal terms, it's easier to understand than just a union statement.
Well, I've been a fisherman now for 11 years, and I've had the same boat for 11 years. I have no desire to sell that. And
big boat, little boat?
It's a little boat, and I'm a combination boat fisherman. I gill net and troll. When I started fishing 11 years ago, I was specifically a gill netter. And as the gill net restrictions became more and more, I was forced to put on additional gear and go trolling. And this was actually encouraged at that time by Jack Davis, who was then the fisheries minister, who said there was fish out there, we had to diversify and go out and get them. And as Dave said, now the Pierce Report would like to eliminate combination boats and restrict me to being simply a gill netter.
Could you make a living as a gill netter alone?
I don't believe that I could. It's been our belief that it's possible if there was a form of catch division implemented by the government. In other words, if gill nets were guaranteed a certain fair shot at the total catch as a gear type. But this is not the case, and the government's not prepared at this time to talk about that.
Your biggest complaint about the report, this business of the form of licensing of fishermen, is that the biggest complaint?
The form of licensing?
Well, for instance...
That's one of our key complaints. Pierce would have the license transferable. And as long as we feel, as long as a license remains transferable, it remains an object of speculation. Now, we believe that was the whole intent of the Davis Plan, and it is the further intent of the Pierce Plan, which we see as Phase 4 of the Davis Plan. Keep the license transferable, allow Mr. Wealthy Dentist from Toronto to come in and purchase a license, have that value inflated, and then he can sell out at a profit.
Is that being done?
That's been done. That's been done. $8 million from day one of the Davis Plan. $8 million was turned over in the space of a year.
I've not always been sympathetic to the Fishermen's Union, but your plan it seems to be much more sane. You say, let licenses die by attrition to with the guy who presently has them.
Exactly.
And if he wants to get out, and if he's not a legitimate fisherman, he gets out.
He gets out. You establish some kind of system whereby those fishermen have incentive to get out, and you know, you don't
Now,
break their backs.
one last word from you before I go to the phone. Quotas. Does he recommend some new form of fearsome quotas of which you people are afraid?
Yes. He's not specifically onto salmon for quotas, but on halibut and herring he is. And our objection is the same thing. He wants those quotas to be in certain increments, and he wants them to be transferable and saleable, which means that people outside the
Oh, you
fishing
mean
industry
like-
could purchase quotas and lease them to bona fide
Like
fishermen.
milk quotas,
Certainly. And that's what we're
which is
against.
one of the great rackets in this country.
Exactly.
Well, what if you follow it to its logical end? For example, one group of people or one company, for example, could monopolize all of the halibut quotas. Although he even says that 5% of the halibut quotas you can't have more than 5%. But he doesn't ensure that. He doesn't make any. He doesn't bring any rules and regulations that would guarantee that, and that's precisely the fault of the whole thing. We would have wheeling and dealing and speculation in this industry like we've never had before if the Pierce report recommendations are
He's
brought
come
in.
through as a great free enterprise capitalist on the side of the big companies, right?
Well, exactly. Like the situation with regards to those quotas is, if you've got a lot of money, you want to buy the public resource,
Buy
you
it.
want to privatize the public resource and own it personally in your pocket, you got the money, it's yours. It's all yours.
We haven't mentioned conservation. We're going to take calls now anyway after the break. Some of the Tory opposition, Tom Sidden out in Richmond, had said, for instance, that if you wanted a scenario to destroy the small boat fishing industry in BC, the Pierce report is it, right?
Exactly.
Is that what Sidden
he
said?
Exactly. He said the Pierce report would be exactly the way to go about it.
Any other major points you want to make?
Yeah, one major point. We have a meeting that we've organized. It's at the Queen Elizabeth Playhouse Theatre, and it's on January the 29th, this Friday at 1 p.m. And we'd like to see all fishermen get out to that meeting, and in fact the public, if anybody is interested in it. And you got to be interested in it because we believe it's going to be one of the most important meetings around.
Am I right in thinking that for the first time the fishing industry, union and non-union, is actually united?
Well, they've been united on issues before, lots of issues.
Only
Lots
on
of times-
price.
Lots of times they've been united on different issues, but there's only one organization, one user group that's come out in support of the Pierce recommendation.
Who is that?
British Columbia Packers and the Fisheries Association of British Columbia.
BC Packet, well,
They're all for it.
if it's as you say it is, why shouldn't they be all for
The
it?
report wasn't out a week and they came out and supported it.
Go ahead to my fisherman.
Bruce, Logan,
Yeah.
in this licensing, I can see a point, but something that worries me and I think should be clarified for those that are listening. You say when the licenses are, someone dies or they sell the boat, the license should not go with it. Am
that
I
right?
correct?
That the license should not be
The license
removed
should
from the
die.
industry.
Would not be transferable.
The license would not be transferable. What we propose is that license would revert to a special committee comprised of fishermen, and that the license would have a value. But the value of that license in no way should exceed the value originally paid by the fisherman when he purchased
All right,
the
then
license.
what happens to the boats then that are owned by the companies? And a good many of them are.
Well,
What about those licenses?
Well, they would obviously be extant because they're going to look after the companies to some extent, aren't they?
well, we're not in favor of fishing companies owning boats. Fishing companies have
They
said,
do, Bruce, you know it.
yes, they do own boats, but they themselves said that they're not in favor of owning boats themselves. Right now, they're trying to sell a whole bunch of their older derelict boats to some people up north and this sort of thing, and as some of the fishermen. The Jack Davis talked about breaking monopoly control of the companies in his original plan, and Pierce himself says that it's not the best thing for the fishing companies to own fishing vessels.
Let me get your position on licenses again. You say that they shouldn't be transferable, but according perhaps to the state of the industry, they should go back to an industry committee for reallocation or disposal. Is that right?
That's exactly it. And in the case of the companies owning licenses, they would like nothing more, in fact, to be able to flog all of the licenses that they have at the moment. The going price is about $3,000. The companies simply do not need the boats.
$3,000 a what?
A ton.
A
A
ton.
ton.
Yes.
In other words, if I a 5,000-ton boat last year, I get 150,000 for the license.
No. A 5-ton boat?
5,000-ton boat.
Well, a 5
Big
boat, there's no
sailor.
such thing as a 5,000-ton boat. But if you had a 20-ton seine boat or a 10 or a 5-ton gill netter, it'd be $3,000 a ton. So in other words,
we're
the license
talking
would be.
about tonnage as fishing capacity.
Oh, capacity, not catch. Okay, I get it. So a 20-ton boat would be the license worth $60,000,
Approximately.
more or less.
BC Packers doesn't need they simply don't need the boats. They're getting all the fish anyway. In fact, they want to sell 300 boats. One of the clauses in the contract is if you buy the boat, you still have to deliver to them. The boats are a problem to them. The interest payment, you got to pump them out all the time. The interest payments are phenomenal. Sell them, put it on the backs of the fishermen. Let the fishermen worry
And
about
some
it.
of these boats are junkers.
They're junkers. They're junkers.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Webster?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I've been a fisherman for 15 years, and over the last 2 years, since 1978, I used to be fish up Millbank Sound. I've been fishing there for 7 years now. They've totally annihilated that fishery until August 1st, and I used to go there June the 15th. I used to go to the west coast of Vancouver Island in October, and since this report came with the Americans, now it looks like I can't even go over there and fish in October anymore. So that just chalks off 2 months of my, or 2.5 months of my normal season procedure since, that was since 1978 I fished there, and all of a sudden all these things come into effect, and I used to be able to go and troll in the Gulf. Now that's all null.
Well, are you complaining about the Pierce report or complaining about stocks being, as you say?
I'm complaining about this Pierce report. That this 10% deal can be the whole net income of my family at the end of the year with the way the fishing is being handled. And I don't believe that as a Canadian citizen that you should have to put in the $50 million into this fisheries buyback, and as the fishermen we have to put 10% in to pay the banks back for the outrageous interest, because this is one of the main reasons the fishermen are going bankrupt, is because like last year the interest was 24%. I had friends paying because when you're a fisherman you can't have any loan for like a 3-year basis. Whatever the loan is and the interest at that time, it's 2% above prime. So when the interest is 22%, the fishermen are paying 24% interest.
Well, Jack,
Dave?
Jack, that caller is absolutely right. Over the last number of years, the restrictions have got very bad on the fishing fleet, and yet at the same time, they allow more vessels to be built. They allow more investment money to come from outside of the industry to build more boats, and the people in it are being restricted more and more all the time. Now, that fellow talks about areas that I'm familiar with, and he's absolutely right. They're closed. They're trying to break the backs of the small boats by closing down all these areas and bringing in all sorts of restrictions, and that goes for the trollers as well.
Is he talking about salmon stocks?
He's talking about salmon stocks too. The regulations that have hit the trollers, for example, in the last couple of 3 years are just outrageous. They can no longer take halibut. They got the number of lines that they can use cut
All
down.
I'm saying is that if it gets this bad that the fishermen can't make any money, am I still on?
Yeah.
I feel that the banks they've been sucking us. They've been taking 24% interest off us. I think it's about time that why should us Canadian citizens, after all the businessmen in the whole country, this buyback shouldn't be any different than a guy that's got a hairdressing salon. If the hairdressing salons
Go for sale.
why should the fishermen and the government and the people have to go pay for hair salons?
I've got your message.
If the banks are going to charge 24%
I got your message.
and wipe us out, they should have the boats back and let them have
Good,
it.
good. He's on a solid point, but everybody gets stuck for the high interest rates, not just fishermen.
Well, he's talking about the royalties. And now the Jack Davis and the Fisheries Department have created the problem that we've got. Now they want the fishermen who are opposed to Jack Davis plans. You recall that, Jack, for years and years
Sure.
and years since 1968. Now they want us with our profit
To finance it.
to finance the buyback.
And public money too, don't forget. 50 million seed money from the public treasury.
Can you imagine the bureaucracy if they set up this $50 million fund? Can you imagine the interest rates on $50 million a year and the bureaucracy the government would set up by creating this great
But
big
what about
buyback program?
conservation? Does anyone really care about conservation?
If you look at the policies of the government, one wouldn't think so. You know, like we can talk until we're blue in the face about the question of the buyback and which boats are going to be bought out of the fleet. The reality is that in the Fraser Estuary, you've got 70% of the wetlands have already been destroyed forever. They're gone.
Trawlers.
The spawning areas that the fish need to, that's gone.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know very much about fishing, but one thing that bothers me about it, we're talking about cutting back on the number of people that fish, Canadians that fish on our coast. Perhaps we have been overfishing it, but what about all the foreign fishing fleets that are in and around our coast? Is that not part of the trouble that we've been overfished in that
Grant?
area?
I'd like to point out that in this Pierce report, which is what we're discussing today, Dr. Pierce was specifically forbidden in his mandate to discuss the problem of international interceptions.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that also has us very angry about it, because it's true. There's a great imbalance just between Canada and the United States in interceptions. And we think if you're going to talk about too many boats chasing too few fish, we'd like to hear a little bit of talk about why there's too few fish. And one of them,
that's the thing that that's
Okay, hold on, ma'am. Hold on.
one of them is exactly that. A lot of our fish are being intercepted, and for some reason, Dr. Pierce was specifically forbade to address that problem. So
That's
he's
interesting.
Well, now why?
Well, because they don't want to get into any more international kerfuffles. Is this with Americans or?
The Liberal government does not want to address that problem because they don't want to jeopardize trade agreements with the United States and other areas. We're giving away 6 million salmon every year to the United States.
Well, what about all these Polish fleets that are out along our coast? Do
That's
they
a
have anything to
different
do with
kettle
that?
of fish, isn't it? Aren't the poles different?
Well, they're fishing mainly bottom fish, dragfish, types of cod and this sort of thing. We're salmon fishermen here now.
Okay, more calls, one more segment with Bruce Logan, Grant Snell, and Dave McIntosh after the break. Three honest-to-God fishermen objecting strongly to the Pierce report. Bruce Logan, Grant Snell, and Dave McIntosh. And this call, 8. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster. I'd like to speak about this Pierce report. There hasn't been any recommendations that I can see of any gear restrictions. For instance, since Davis plan has been brought in, there's been an increase of seine fleet. And the seine boats that are out there on the coast right now have a 6-ton license permit to seine out there. And another thing that's wrong with the seine boats is that the strips of their net are much too deep than the original seine.
Let me ask Bruce and my little panel about this. I thought the new license under the Pierce report, if implemented, would designate and restrict gear on ships.
Well, one of the proposals of Pierce that the government is looking into right now is they want to do away with combination boats.
Well, you'd be afraid that your license might say, if this comes in, gill net only or troll only, but not combination.
That is correct. If it comes in the way he had it implemented, it wouldn't even say gillnet or troll. It would say strictly gillnet, because...
Now, what about the seine boats, the big company seine boats? Are most seine boats company boats?
No, most seine boats are partly in the hands, mostly in the hands of individuals, although there's about 600, so the company does have a fair
Well,
chunk
do they
of
get
those.
too much of the catch?
Well, that's not the problem, Jack. There's about 600 seine boats, and each of those boats has a crew, and they have to make a living in the industry too. Where the problem was that they allowed too many more to be built, because the seine boats themselves, who have been fishing on this coast for a great number of years, they themselves have faced problems. For example, Pocahontas Point in Alberni Inlet, you know, there's sometimes up to 25 and 30 boats waiting there for position. So, you know, what the government has to do, and we're in favor of it, is an intelligent kind of a buyback program that would buy some seiners, buy some trollers, and buy some gillnetters, and bring in kind of the license limitation that the Fishermen's Union is talking about, whereby you have the license on the individual. And therefore you would, when you put the license on the individual and take it from the boat, you stop the overcapitalization and the speculation in the industry.
Do you agree with that, Bruce?
Wholeheartedly.
In other words, you're all agreed that the capacity of the fleet must be reduced, are you?
We're not opposed in principle at all to a buyback scheme.
But
We
you-
want a viable buyback scheme, and a buyback scheme that takes into account real people, human beings, fishermen.
But you are agreed that too many people chase too few fish.
There are.
That's statistically the case right now. We have to admit
Would
that.
you accept that?
I would. I certainly
Yeah,
would.
it's
I certainly
statistically true.
would accept that. There are, you know, Pierce spent all summer and a whole year and lots of taxpayers' money identifying the problems, but I think anybody can identify the problems. We have too many boats chasing too few fish. There's
Do you
two ways.
concede there must be some, not arbitrary, but some reasonably firm control of the industry, both in conservation and in the number of boats and types fishing?
Most definitely.
We're all agreed on that.
Most
But
definitely.
just one point on the buyback. Now, the buyback that Pierce talks about is buying back the boats and retiring those licenses, but making those boats that are being bought back available to be bought back by the industry again.
And that's stupid.
Mr. Webster, can I make a couple more points?
You make one more.
Okay, I've been fishing for 26 years. I know Homer Stevens and his crew, but here's another thing. They should have better area control. We have 29 areas on our coast, and there's only one area that is open for the whole fishing fleet for a 24-hour to a 48-hour basis, and I think that's absolutely wrong as far as bona fide fishermen goes. So what is a gill netter or a seine boat operator supposed to do 6 days of the week?
Sit there and do nothing.
Yeah, well, the season is very short to begin with, and it's very restricted.
Is that valid, Bruce?
I believe so. I think what the caller is getting at, too, is that there's another question of area licensing. The government is telling us now that they figure the coast is just too big to take care of under a one-area system. They want to divide the whole coast into several areas and to make it ostensibly easier to manage.
And
And
these
we're against that for very obvious reasons. You'll end up with a situation, if you have a saleable quota, you have a transferable license subject to speculation, and you divide the coast up into areas, you're going to end up with a situation like in Alaska where you have a few gill netters fishing Bristol Bay. They've got a good run coming up. You want to buy a gill netter in Bristol Bay, it's going to cost you $288,000. The same vessel in Puget Sound is going to cost you $12,000 to $15,000.
Oh, my God. That would be exclusive area fishing for the selected people. That's no good.
No.
Hey?
That once again starts putting artificial values
That
on the
becomes a
licensing
private
for the
club.
area.
And if you're lucky, you're in the club, and if you're not, might be who you know, not what you know.
We refer to it as privatization of the resource.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Well,
That's you.
oh, Jack?
Yes.
Oh, I'd like to bring one point up with the fellow that Bruce there. Does the Indians still have the rights to, for each one of their children, as they get to the age of 16, to get a fishing license and get a boat sponsored by the government?
Is that bad?
No, I mean, the thing is, you're trying to eliminate the fleet, and yet the population of the Indians grow very fast, in which the fleet will never come down.
What do you say to the Indian position? Because Pierce recommends an Indian corporation be established to acquire licenses for Indians that would be non-transferable to non-Indians. Now, is this bad or good?
Well, I think that's good. Licenses that are held by Indians definitely shouldn't be given over to non-Indians. They should be given to Indians.
Do they have an extra edge? The Fisheries Development Corporation, non-profit, would buy licensed vessels from non-Indian fishermen and give them to qualified Indian applicants. Is that bad?
I think it's bad.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's bad or if it's not bad.
Yes, Jack, let's put it this way. Eventually, in time comes, there'll be more people, more Indians owning more boats than there will be white people as far as that goes.
Well, I don't think
The fact is,
I think there's more Indians fishing than there is white people at the moment right now.
that's just simply not true. In fact, the native participation in the fishery has declined, and one of the reasons was, you go back to Pierce, you go back to Davis again. Once those licenses became transferable, and you could make a buck on them, the companies got wise to that. They took a lot of the boats away from the small communities all up the coast. Whole fishing communities, Guilford Island, lost all of their gill nets simply because that license was transferable and it was worth a buck.
Go ahead, please. Hello. What are you? That's two, Gladys. Are you there? No, you're not there. Okay, I'll take one more call. Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Yep. That's you.
People want to make more into it out of 3 months than the average worker in a whole year. How come the price of fish has gone out of proportion?
I'm afraid we can hardly tackle that one at the moment. Just let's sum up. You're an ordinary fisherman. You're from the union. The entire industry, fishing industry, is behind you, except the companies, right?
That's
Right.
On
correct.
fighting the Pierce report.
That's correct.
That is correct.
Yes.
And you see it as an extension of the unsuccessful Davis buyback plan, which created all this speculation and non-fishing investment in boats on the West Coast.
It's an extension of the Davis plan, and
You don't
we
want-
believe it's not going to fly. It's not going to work.
You don't want the royalties, you don't want the levies, and you want a sane system of licensing for real fishermen.
And all we're asking for at the moment really is give us time to meet with fellow fishermen, fishing people in the industry, to discuss it
Before they do anything.
before they do anything.
Okay.
One thing, Jack, you know, here we sit here in Vancouver, a lot of us, and mostly the politicians, of course, are in the big cities and this sort of thing, you know, but they really haven't taken into consideration what effect the Pierce report is going to have on the small communities up and down British Columbia. I can tell you that some of the small boat fishermen do not like some of the licensing things that Pierce is talking about. Some of the people in Sointula and Skidegate and Ucluelet were for years they fished. You know, we've got other opportunities and things here, but those small boat fishermen, I can tell you, I've got my calls myself from friends and other people, and they do not like the licensing scheme talked about by Pierce.
You put your case well this morning. I'm glad I had you fishermen here. My thanks to Bruce Logan, Grant Snell, and Dave McIntosh. Your meeting is on Friday.
Friday, the 29th, this Friday, 1 p.m., Queenie Playhouse.
Everybody welcome.
Everybody welcome.
Thanks. Next, I'm going to have a cool discussion on special survey done of the public defender system, experimental public defender system project in Burnaby with Patricia Brantingham, Associate Professor of Criminology at SFU, and Brian Rolfe, Executive Director of the Legal Services Society, after the break. Legal aid is accepted almost like any other public service now, whether it's Medicare or anything else. And in British Columbia, we spend a fair amount. We're the second highest expenditure on legal aid in all of the country. Quebec is higher. They have $5.72 per capita on legal aid. In British Columbia, $4.42. Down in the underprivileged parts of Canada, like New Brunswick, they spend $1.06 per capita, but they may not have so many criminals, or accused, I should say, as we have in British Columbia. But Patricia Brantingham is one of the authors of this interesting study on a public defender system, which was run in Burnaby, and I've got all 7 of the reports here, none of which I have read. And I've also got here this morning Brian Rolfe, legal aid, been in the legal aid business a long time.
Quite a few years, Jack.
You now run the Legal Services Commission.
I'm its executive director, yes. It's called the Legal Services Society.
A vast bureaucracy of well-meaning, do-gooding people.
I'll take your description.
Now, Patricia, can you tell me, because I know nothing about it really, what your final conclusions were and what the experiment was you ran in Burnaby on a public defender system?
I might need Brian to give a little bit of background to the experiment, but basically Legal Services Society was interested in finding out if a public defender mode, that is using staff lawyers to deliver legal aid, was a cost-effective means of delivering legal services to people who couldn't afford counsel. So,
instead of what you might call private legal aid.
Right. The current system in British Columbia, someone applies. If they're deemed eligible for legal aid, they are referred to private counsel. They have their choice of counsel. In the U.S., there have been public defender systems. Elsewhere in Canada, there have been public defender systems that use staff counsel. BC was interested in looking at this sort of operation in our particular context here. And because of that, they set up an experimental office in Burnaby, a public defender office in Burnaby, ran it for 2.5 years, and the study that we're talking about is the results of the operation of that system.
Now, in other words, if I'm accused and put into lockup in Burnaby in some offence, we'll take a criminal offence for the sake of clarity. When does the
This is just criminal.
Oh, it's just criminal?
Just criminal.
When do I get my public defender lawyer? When I appear in court and plead not guilty?
Well, the province of British Columbia has an extensive system of what they call duty counsel. And if you got picked up and put in the lockup and appeared in provincial court anywhere in British Columbia, you would have a lawyer present for you at your first appearance at court. It's someone they label a duty counsel. In Burnaby, we had staff lawyers who would handle trials and extensive cases. They also serve this function, which is available to all people who end up in court.
How many lawyers would you have in your experimental public defender project in Burnaby?
Okay, the experimental public defender office was a small office. It had 3 lawyers, it had a secretary and someone called a paralegal, and we can talk about that later. It was a small office with 3 lawyers because most of the cities in British Columbia are such that only a small office with 3 lawyers would be appropriate. So an experimental office that was small was set up.
And did they handle all the legal aid cases, criminal, that came up in Burnaby in that period?
No, they didn't. They handled most of them. Some cases were referred out. When caseloads became too heavy, they referred cases out to private counsel.
Now, on your overall picture, would it cost more money? Forget about the justice of the thing at the moment. Would it cost more or cost less to replace legal aid with public defender systems in most of BC?
Okay, I'm glad you separated out justice from cost because I think that's an important consideration when looking at the study. Generally, we found that the cost of a public defender system and the cost of delivering legal aid through private counsel was about a toss-up. There is no real difference. There would be two legal services society. There would be no massive saving on either mode. So decisions between the two for the legal services society rest on the justice questions.
My instinct would tell me, I don't know what your report says, that you'd get more guilty pleas, and sometimes properly guilty pleas, under a public defender system than you would under the legal aid system.
You do get more guilty pleas and fewer trials under a public defender system than you do with private counsel.
Now we're talking about justice now then. Could there be any difference? Would a public defender, Brian, not be more in the know in any particular place, and I mean properly in the know?
Yes.
I'm much more entitled to go for a quick settlement with a plea bargain, a little backroom conversation, than a legal aid lawyer.
Well, the report seems to find that. It finds that the public defenders who were there every day, familiar with the Crown Counsel, knew what would happen in the courtroom, and were there far more often than the private lawyers.
Knew the judge.
Knew the judge.
How he'd be liable to handle a case.
Knew his habits, right.
Whether he'd be good for an absolute discharge or not.
Yes.
I mean, an opinion. That's
right. Nothing improper about that, but just the sheer exposure to it would put them in a position to know what was happening. And that, in part, explains why there were more guilty pleas with the public defenders than with lawyers from private practice handling those cases.
That might be good from my point of view. I've always had the sneaking suspicion, no sniping intended, that legal aid often takes pleas to a stage where a guilty plea comes anyway, but it's longer and slower and jams the courts. Don't you have that feeling?
Well, we have that nagging fear. That's why one of the reasons we were very interested in this study was to get a comparison of what the private bar are doing on legal aid cases, too.
The Globe and Mail says, Patricia, that using salaried government lawyers could save the province more than $6.1 million a year. Do you disagree with that figure?
It came out of the report. Maybe I'd like to clarify it some. There are costs to the Legal Services Society, and they're a toss-up. There are court costs. So you talk about clogging the court, unnecessary trials. And it may be that the court costs would be less.
Oh, yeah. You're saying that in the cost to the public of a public defender system against a legal aid system, no toss-up. But in savings overall on the administration of justice, there
are potential savings, primarily because the public defender system produced differential sentencing. That is, fewer people were sentenced to jail under the public defender system than under the Judicare system. And that has incredible implications for incarceration costs.
Give me that again. There are more people
sentenced to jail.
Under the public defender project?
Less under the public defender.
Less?
More using private counsel in the Judicare system.
When you say Judicare, does she mean legal aid?
She means sending the cases to private lawyers.
Is that what we call legal aid?
That's what we call legal aid, and that's what the report calls Judicare, and a lot of people call Judicare.
That's a new word for me. Do you want to use Judicare or legal aid?
Well, I think that public defenders and lawyers in private practice are both legal aid, so Judicare helps to draw a distinction between
Public
the two.
defender and Judicare. More, we're going to take some calls on legal aid and Judicare too after the break. Patricia Brantingham of SFU Criminology and Brian Rolfe have been telling me about this experimental project of a public defender. It really is the American system, the public defender, is it not?
I think Brian could tell you a lot more about that, but no, we do have public defender systems in Canada.
Well, we got it from the States, didn't we?
Yeah, certainly that's where the pressures come, because about 2/3 of the people who get legal aid for criminal matters in the States have public defenders. So there's a pressure obviously coming from there. There are other places who have public defenders, though. Germany has a public defender system, for example.
Well, they're not noted for their particular adhesion to justice and law over the years, so leave them alone. Okay. Do they have it in Britain?
No, Britain has entirely use of private lawyers.
Now, what does our legal aid cost a year, our Judicare cost a year in British Columbia now?
Well, our Judicare, the cost of sending cases to private lawyers is $6.8 million this year, and about $4.5 million of that is for criminal legal aid.
Now, you have a fair number of staff legal aid lawyers as it is right now.
Yes, we have.
And a number of offices throughout the province.
That's right. We have 16 offices around the province of our own. We grant funds to another 10 offices who are community law offices and have their own boards of directors.
And you run all of this for $6.8 million?
No. You asked about the Judicare, and that's just the cost that we spend in paying lawyers in private practice is $6.8 million. The cost of our whole operation for all of the things we do is $15 million this year.
Not too bad. I have one pet question I always ask Brian on the subject. I haven't asked him for years. I remember being appalled once, Pat, when it came to my attention, as we say, that one particular downtown lawyer had he'd made in excess of $50,000 on legal aid, and that seemed to be a shocker at the time, didn't it?
It was a shocker at the time.
How many lawyers make the full living off legal aid? Judicare.
Virtually none. The highest bill in the province last year from our records was $45,000. So if you add inflation to your $50,000 from several years ago, it's really actually going down.
It's gone down a little bit.
The work is being spread much more widely amongst lawyers.
Now, from the study or from your knowledge, first of all, what do we now get on Judicare? This experiment was for criminal actions only.
Right.
Right? What do we now have access to on Judicare if we really have no money? And I say really with a snide look into the camera, not mentioning any names.
Okay. Basically, you get legal aid for any criminal offense where you're likely to go to jail if you're convicted. We've drawn a distinction, and we still do, between what the code calls summary offenses and indictable offenses. And we'll always give it in indictable offenses if you're financially eligible. We'll only give it in summary offenses if you're likely to go to jail. So for the main part, we're looking at the more serious cases under the criminal code.
If I come to you for a summary conviction offense, which might well give me a record, and even if I have a good case and got no money, you won't help me.
That's right.
Yeah, you didn't start off that way, but you brought that in later on after Judicare began.
We brought it in, we covered summary offenses for a while in the mid-'70s, and then when the financial squeeze got tighter, we cut out summary offenses again.
And you don't take defamation, private prosecutions, small claims court, or breach of promise actions?
Right. We occasionally get involved in small claims, but most of those things people can handle themselves if we give them some information.
And obviously breach of promise actions are things from the far past.
There's not a big market for those, right?
Now, okay, what is your recommendation? Now, what are you going to do now with the Brantingham report, Brantingham and some other people, Winterdyke, Nancy Maxim, Raymond Corrado, and Peter Burns?
Peter Burns.
Yeah. What are you going to do with it?
Well, we have a board of directors, Jack, and that board has to review the report very carefully, has to hear what other people think, and then we have to make some decisions about whether we, first of all, want to continue Burnaby, and secondly, whether we want to do it elsewhere in the province.
What would a public defender lawyer make? The same as one of the people in the Crown Counsel office, regional Crown?
They're pretty close to the same salaries and benefits.
Because things ain't so good for lawyers these days, are it? It would be nice to create some more salary jobs for lawyers, wouldn't it?
Well, for us, it's a case of whether we pay the lawyers in private practice or whether we pay our staff lawyers. We're still paying lawyers to handle cases on either system.
But the legal aid system at the moment, Judicare, works quite well.
Yes, and I think the report bears that out.
Let's see if there's any public interest in the public defenders or the Judicare legal aid system after the break. I can't have Brian Rolfe here without raising just a little bit about the Olson case, because I asked the Attorney General the other day about legal aid in relation to Olson. Was Olson a proper recipient for legal aid when he was charged with murder?
When he was charged with murder, in our judgment, he was financially eligible for legal aid.
He didn't have enough money for a lawyer.
That's correct.
You have limits. I think you even have scales of income to qualify for legal aid for a family man, don't you?
Well, we have a discretionary income test. Basically, we look at what's left over after you meet your basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter. And if there's money available to pay a lawyer after that, then you're not eligible for legal aid.
Now, I don't know, I'm not talking about the Olson case in this question, but if I own a house, do I get legal aid? Or if I have a good equity in a house, do I get legal aid?
You might. We have to look at two things. First of all, if you borrow money against that house to pay for your legal fees, are you going to be able to make the payments? And
it's a means test.
That's
really.
right. That's right.
All right, I'll give you one other question. Touch wood. If I were charged with murder today and had no funds in your qualification and applied for legal aid, I could conceivably get it.
Yes.
If my wife won the Irish sweep a little later, would you review my qualification to get legal aid?
Yes, we would. One of the
Will you review it in the Olson case?
Well, we will review it, yes. But from everything we've been able to find out so far, that money is inaccessible.
So Brian Rolfe, inaccessible.
Yes. As I understand it, there's a trust agreement that's been drawn between the Olson family and I presume the RCMP. I don't know who the other party is.
The RCMPE division prepared by a Justice Department lawyer on the RCMPE division's behalf. I can tell you that.
And that's money that's beyond the control of Olson.
And so therefore, but does Brian Rolfe tell me today that there will be a review of the legal aid given to Olson?
Yes.
Soon?
Yes.
Public result? Result published?
I'm not sure, Jack. We have a confidentiality provision within our statute, and normally I wouldn't say anything about a person being on legal aid, but because it's been disclosed that this was a legal aid case, I'm prepared to talk about it publicly. I'm not quite sure at the moment what position we should take by the time we end any review.
Fair enough. Tackle that straight up. I actually wasn't going to ask you that question until it suddenly struck me I must ask you it. Go ahead, please.
Hello. I wrote you a letter, Mr. Webster, 2 years ago. I was being taken back to court over child visitation rights. And legal aid handled it very poorly. They had no concern at all.
Well, ma'am, that's a judgment. We can't go back over 2 years about it.
No, it's still in court.
But people come to me with heartbreaking stories, and it's impossible for me, unless I spent 3 weeks on it.
No, I was just going to tell you that I was told right to my face that they were more worried about my ex-husband because he was paying his hard-earned cash and I was using legal aid.
Well, I think everybody here would have sympathy with you if you were treated like that, wouldn't it?
I agree, yeah.
Well, we lost, and it cost me $5,000 to have it righted.
But you had legal aid the first time and lost.
Yeah, but I borrowed money left and right, and $5,000 later, I had the order changed. But now they've changed the law again, and now I'm fighting for the money that he owes us. They've put that back in Supreme Court, as the paper said last night.
My dear, leave your number with Gladys and I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Would you do that?
Yep.
The woman crying on the telephone. That was a very interesting Supreme Court of Canada decision yesterday, was it not?
Yes, I think quite a surprise to most people.
correct me if I'm wrong, it's been decided that the family court may decide the custody of children, but can't deal with the property matters relating to the house and whatnot.
That's right.
Do you think this is a good step?
Well, I have always been concerned about the fact that family law has been seen in this province as something that was suitable for a lower court and not suitable for a higher court. And fender benders, motor vehicle accidents, were good for high court but not for the lower court. And to the extent that the high court is seen as handling the most serious problems in our society, then I think the high court is a proper place to be handling family problems.
Especially custody of children.
Certainly. The problem, of course, in this province is that as soon as you get out of the lower mainland, it's difficult to have the Supreme Court handling a lot of custody matters.
And costs a fortune. I mean, it does. You've got to produce money for a Supreme Court custody matter.
I think it costs a fortune, but I'm not entirely sure why it has to cost an awful lot more. We have the same kinds of judges, we have similar kinds of procedures, but it is more costly, and but there have to be ways of reducing that cost.
Especially in custody cases. Now, next call. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Jack, I didn't realize that you were going to bring up the Olson question at the beginning of this call, but...
Didn't mean to, but I did.
Okay. The question I would like to put to the two legal experts that you have there at the moment was, why was Clifford Olson eligible to receive the use of a legal aid lawyer?
I've asked the question, I got the answer, the matter's going to be reviewed. I don't think you need to hammer that. Have you another point?
No, just a minute. What I want to say is, were they aware that his wife had access to a private lawyer to negotiate the transfer of those funds at the time?
That's a valid question.
To the best of my knowledge, we were not aware of it. I never took the application personally, but from what I can find out, we didn't know about it.
And I can add to you from my own knowledge and my questioning of the Attorney General that the matter was a deep, dark secret as much as possible, and then, of course, everybody began to hear the rumors. But there certainly was no public statement about that. Do you have another question?
Yes. Why is the fact that that lawyer has had to remain so unanimous even after the
Not
negotiations
unanimous, anonymous. But you're just pushing that point. I don't need to go into that for the moment. Unanimous or anonymous? He meant anonymous, didn't he?
He must have.
Go ahead from Prince George.
Hello, Jack.
Yeah.
This is just going to be a quick comment. I was charged with theft over $50. I didn't see a lawyer until we went into court. We went into a back room, and the lawyer said to me, he said, this is legal aid. He said, it doesn't matter to me whether you're guilty or not. He says, they're going to get paid anyway.
Were you found guilty or not?
Whether I was found guilty or not.
Were you found guilty?
Yes, I was.
Did you deserve to be found guilty?
No, I did not.
Oh, when was this? How many years ago?
About 11.
Well, that's back in the bad old days before we had the new breed of judicial liars.
Yeah.
Did you signal a break? I'll take a break and come back and finish with Patricia Brantingham and Brian Rolfe after the break. Patricia Brantingham, this report on the Experimental Public Defender Project. Did you say that we still got the public defenders in Burnaby?
As far as I know, the office is still operating in Burnaby, but no longer as an experimental operation. The Legal Services Society, I imagine, is going to review its continuance.
Brian?
Yeah, we have 3 new lawyers in that office, Jack, but we're carrying on the experiment, if you like, at least till the end of next March, because we need time to review this report.
How many offices would you need with if you were going to staff, say, centres with the kind of load of Burnaby with
Yes.
3 offices? How many offices would you need?
Well, there are a lot of places in the province that are too small to support an office, but the report identifies 11 spots where we could open an office and where there's enough cases to keep that office running successfully.
I challenge you to remember the 11 offhand. Do you know them,
I wrote them
Patricia?
down.
You've written them down.
Yep.
Good.
Campbell River,
Uh-huh.
Prince Rupert,
Uh-huh.
Williams Lake, And these are kind of in descending order of likelihood.
Right.
Chilliwack, Prince George, Nanaimo, Kelowna, and then Victoria right on the edge.
Victoria. Could they do with 3 lawyers, maybe?
In the impact analysis, when we tried to identify where it went into, we also looked at what the impact would be on the private bar of conversion. That is, how serious an economic impact it would have on the private bar. And that went into identifying it. And the impact would be increases as you move towards Victoria.
I get that. Campbell River, Prince George, Williams Lake, Chilliwack, Prince Rupert, Nanaimo, Kelowna, and Victoria.
Vancouver's another. Vancouver's a special office. It would be bigger, obviously.
You'd need 10 or 15 there,
yes,
wouldn't it?
You could set up a 10-lawyer office in
Vancouver.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask Brian, where exactly do I apply for legal aid?
Well, we have, in Vancouver, we have an office at Alexander Street, but we have around the province a number of offices, and they're all in the yellow pages under legal aid. If there's no full-time office, we have area directors who are lawyers in private practice. And again, those should be listed in the yellow pages. If you have difficulty finding that, get in touch with somebody at your local courthouse.
Just under the yellow pages under legal aid, eh?
Yes.
Yeah, and the legal aid office in Vancouver is easy to identify. It's in Harry Rankin's big building at the corner of Columbia and Maine.
Columbia
Not
Maine?
Columbia.
Alexander and
Alexander and Maine. That's Harry Rankin's building. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Harry does. I always like to say that about Harry, you know, because he really is a capitalist. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'd like to know what the difference would be to me if charged on a criminal offense, the difference between the legal aid and what you're proposing.
What would it mean to the client? The actual difference between judicare and a public defender on the spot.
One of the things we did find out in talking to public defense counsel clients in Burnaby is that very much they didn't even know they had a public defender. They could perceive no difference between the two modes of delivering legal aid. You would go in and make an application, your eligibility would be assessed. Instead of being referred to the private bar, you would be referred to one of the staff lawyers.
You lost your choice.
In the experimental operation, you lost the choice. One of the things we found was the office ran efficiently if they also could refer to private counsel. That means that if you produce a new office that's not experimental, you possibly could continue to allow people to select private lawyers if they prefer, and public defenders would handle cases where there were no requests.
Did you have many rejections of the staff lawyer, you might say?
No, very high satisfaction levels.
Oh, can you measure satisfaction levels in the legal profession?
Well, as much as you
lose.
can, right. With whatever measures we used, they were the same for judicare and public defenders.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack.
Yes.
I was wondering, why is it that non-Canadians are given legal aid? And
I don't know if we've got the answer to that question, do we, Brian? I remember a big fuss when a ruling was given that certain Chinese drug traffickers were not to get legal aid, but don't you still supply legal aid in normal cases?
Yes, we do. We still provide legal aid to anybody who's faced with a charge in our courts, a serious charge, who can't afford to pay counsel. We have reciprocal arrangements with other areas too, so that they'll do the same for our citizens who happen to be in a foreign jurisdiction where they can't afford counsel.
But there was a big kerfuffle. Remember about the Chinese drug traffickers?
I remember the Hong Kong drug trafficking case. There was quite a public outcry at times that we should be granting legal aid to those people, yes.
And something was done, but my memory's gone. Thank you very much, sir. Next call, please. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes?
Yeah, Jack. This is about this. Now, if a guy is a criminal all his life and he gets legal aid every time he comes up, he's got nothing. And then a fellow that owns a house and he's scraping by, he's maybe putting $100 a month in the bank. Now, he's trying to make a living, he's trying to put a little ahead, and now he has to pay for this service, and the guy that's been a criminal all his life doesn't have to.
What's the position? That's a very good question. What's the position of a guy with a record as long as your arm?
We'll still provide legal aid. That's our policy at the moment because we think that in terms of the impact for him, he's looking at a serious consequence, and that's what we make the judgment on when we decide to grant legal aid.
Mm-hmm. So the record doesn't matter?
Record doesn't matter.
In fact, the more trouble he's in, the more he needs a lawyer.
Well, everybody's out to throw the book to him at that point. What we're interested in is seeing that he have an adequate defense.
I can't argue against that. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack. I was wondering if I could have some clarification from you regarding the statement that you made about the German public defenders.
It was an unwise statement on my behalf. I didn't think that Germany was perhaps the best place as a comparison with our Anglo-Saxon system of legal aid.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Did I get off the hook?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
I shouldn't have said that. Then I do withdraw it. I'm guilty of these things.
It is a different justice system, though.
It is a different justice system, but he knows that that wasn't what I was meaning. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
Yes, I have a question for your guests there regarding legal aid and the staff lawyer and the private lawyer. What incentive does the private lawyer have to take a case for legal aid? Are his fees a legal aid standard, or does he have his own fees?
We pay the lawyer according to a legal aid tariff that we have. From all that we can find out, it's approximately half of what he would normally charge. So I guess it's not a big incentive, but he does get paid something.
So as a client of legal aid, I can pick any lawyer that I wish?
We have a choice of counsel system, and if you choose a lawyer, we'll contact him. If he's willing to act, then we'll appoint him. Lots of lawyers are so busy that we can't always guarantee the choice, though.
But there is a list of lawyers who practice for legal aid.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. But if I, for instance, wanted Harry Rankin on my murder charge, you'd ask Harry if he's willing to take it. If Harry was free enough, Harry would probably take it.
That's right.
Although I noticed, just as a matter of comparison, that private lawyer's preparation tariff for preparation of murder case plus first day of trial is only $500 in BC.
That's right. The average case costs only about $235.
In Saskatchewan, for the first day of a murder, you get $2,800. Preparation and first day of a murder trial.
Yes.
I'm amazed you're getting away with a $500 base. How much time, Fred? 30 seconds. Patricia Brantingham, I'm grateful for you coming this morning, and we shall follow with interest to see what the Legal Services Society finally recommends, although I suppose the decision on whether or not the public defender system be kept and enlarged would be in the hands of the Attorney General, Victoria.
No, I think it's in the hands of the Legal Services Society Board of Directors, because under our statute, our own board has that kind of authority.
You can spend the money given to you in the best way you think fit.
That's correct.
My thanks to Patricia Brantingham and to Brian Rolfe. Now I'll be back after the break. Dave Barrett, leader of the New Democratic Party, will be my guest tomorrow morning. We'll just go through the whole gamut of knowledge from A to B tomorrow, A to Z, tomorrow, with Dave Barrett, the leader of the New Democratic Party. Didn't really mean that, Davey. At 9 a.m. precisely.